You never think it'll happen to you until it does. 13 years of marriage, built on trust, shattered in a single moment when I uncovered my wife's secret. What I did next changed everything, and it's a story you won't forget. The whole thing started with an unusual night. For the past 13 years, my wife, Lauren, and I had lived what most people would call a picture-perfect life. We had a cozy suburban home, 2 kids who kept us on our toes, and a marriage that, at least to me, seemed solid. But that night, well, everything began to feel off. It wasn't one big thing, but a collection of smaller ones. Lauren had been acting distant for months. She was always on her phone, texting late into the night. When I asked her who it was, she'd brush it off with a vague, just work stuff. Her job as a project manager for a local firm had never been the kind of role to demand late-night texts, but I didn't press her. After all, trust was the cornerstone of our relationship, right? That night, though, something inside me shifted. I came home early from a business trip, wanted to surprise her, and found the house unusually quiet. The kids were at a friend's house for a sleepover. The lights in the living room were dimmed, and Lauren was on the couch, typing furiously on her laptop. She didn't even hear me come in. "Hey," I said, breaking the silence. She startled, slamming the laptop shut. "Oh, hi. I didn't expect you back until tomorrow," she said, her tone almost too cheerful, her smile a little too quick. "That's why they call it a surprise," I said, leaning in to kiss her. She turned her head at the last second, and I ended up awkwardly kissing her cheek. The moment was small, but left an imprint. Later, when she went to shower, I couldn't stop myself. I glanced at her laptop on the coffee table. It was locked, but the name of a chat app one didn't recognize was open on the taskbar. My stomach twisted. For the first time in our marriage, I felt compelled to snoop. I didn't act on it that night, though. I told myself I was imagining things. Paranoia. But as the days turned into weeks, the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Lauren was more secretive, her phone always face down, her mood swinging from overly kind to inexplicably distant. I started paying attention to the small details. She had new perfume, one I didn't recognize. She was going to the gym more, something she hadn't cared about in years. And then there was the laughter. Soft, private chuckles when she read her texts. One night, when she claimed she had a late meeting downtown, I couldn't hold back anymore. I decided to follow her. It was against every moral fiber I had, but I had to know. I drove carefully behind her car, staying just far enough not to be seen. She didn't go downtown. She didn't go anywhere remotely work-related. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a swanky restaurant I'd never been to. Moments later, a man I didn't recognize got out of his car and hugged her. That was when my heart broke. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I left the restaurant and spent hours parked in my car, trying to think about what to do. Every part of me wanted to storm back in there and demand an explanation, but I held back. Something told me I needed proof, and not just for my own peace of mind. I needed to know how deep this went. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. The decision to hire a private investigator felt surreal, like I'd crossed some invisible line I couldn't step back over. The idea had popped into my head in the early hours of the morning, while I was sitting alone in my car outside a 24-hour diner. I Googled private investigator and found a firm with solid reviews. The man who answered the phone had a calm, professional demeanor that made me feel, for the first time that night, like I had a sliver of control. By the next afternoon, I was sitting across from him in his small, no-frills office. His name was Dan, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet competence. He listened intently as I told him my suspicions, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "It's not uncommon for someone in your situation to want answers," he said carefully. "But before we proceed, I have to ask, what's your end goal here? Are you looking to confront her? Divorce? Reconciliation? I hesitated. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. I just need to know, I said finally. If there's something going on, I need proof. Something concrete. Dan nodded, reaching for a notepad. All right, here's how we'll proceed. I'll start with surveillance, discreetly, of course. I'll tail her during her late meetings and other outings. If there's something to uncover, we'll find it. Over the next few days, I carried on as though everything was normal. I went to work, spent time with the kids, and made small talk with Lauren, all while Dan sent me daily updates. The first 2 nights, nothing happened. She really did go to the gym, just as she said. She ran errands, picked up groceries, and came home. I started to feel a twinge of guilt, wondering if I'd jumped to conclusions. But then, on the 3rd day, Dan called me in the middle of the afternoon. We've got something, he said. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. What do you mean? She met with the same man you described at the restaurant, Dan said. They were together for over an hour at a coffee shop, sitting in a private booth. From the body language, it looked intimate. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. Did you get pictures? I did. I'll send them over. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I opened the email Dan had sent me. The pictures were grainy, but clear enough to tell the story. Lauren and the man sat close together, leaning in as though sharing secrets. In one image, his hand rested lightly on hers. In another, she was smiling at him in a way I hadn't seen her smile at me in years. I felt like I was going to be sick. The next day, Dan called again. She's meeting him tonight, he said. Same restaurant as before. If you want to see it for yourself, now's the time. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. I parked my car down the street and walked to the restaurant, my heart pounding. Inside, the place was dimly lit, with an air of understated luxury. I scanned the room until I found them. Lauren and the man were seated in a corner booth, their heads close together. She was laughing, her hand resting lightly on his arm. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. The sight of them felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I wanted to march over and demand answers, to shout and make a scene, but I couldn't move. Instead, I turned and walked out, my mind racing. By the time I got back to my car, my anger had turned into a kind of cold, focused determination. If Lauren thought she could humiliate me like this, she was wrong. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make sure she couldn't deny it. I called Dan and told him to dig deeper. I want to know everything, I said. Where they go, what they do, who this guy is. Don't leave anything out. Dan agreed, and over the next week, he sent me a steady stream of evidence. Photos of them together at various locations, records of her calls and texts to him, even a report on the man himself. His name was Matt, and he was married. The realization hit me like a second betrayal. Not only was Lauren cheating on me, but she was doing it with someone who was betraying his own family. It added another layer to my anger, a sense of disgust I couldn't shake. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. Dan handed me a folder filled with neatly organized evidence, a damning collection of photos, records, and observations. It's airtight, he said. If you decide to confront her, she won't be able to deny a thing. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I wanted to wait for the right moment, to make sure that when I did, it would have the maximum impact. And so, I kept quiet, carrying the weight of the truth alone. The week leading up to the confrontation was one of the hardest of my life. Knowing what Lauren was doing, watching her go about her day as though nothing had changed, it took every ounce of strength I had to keep up the facade. I didn't want to tip her off or give her any reason to suspect that I knew. The kids were my anchor during that time, their laughter and daily routines keeping me grounded when I felt like I might unravel. Dan had suggested a calm, controlled confrontation, one-on-one, in private. But I had other plans. I wanted Lauren to face the weight of what she had done, not just to me but to our family. I thought about how much she had taken for granted, the trust she'd shattered, the years we'd built together. I needed her to understand that this wasn't something she could sweep under the rug. That's when the idea came to me. I wouldn't just confront her. I'd bring her betrayal out into the open. I knew where she would be the following week, at her firm's annual charity gala, an event she never missed. I was supposed to attend with her, but in light of recent discoveries, I had other plans. The night of the gala arrived. Lauren had spent the day getting ready, flitting around the house with an energy I hadn't seen in months. She wore a sleek black dress, the kind that hugged her in all the right places, and as much as I wanted to stay angry, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. This was the woman I'd loved for 13 years, and yet, I barely recognized her anymore. "I'll see you there, right?" she asked as she applied her lipstick in front of the hallway mirror. I smiled faintly. "I've got some errands to run first, but I'll catch up." She didn't seem to notice the edge in my voice. "Okay, don't be late," she said, leaning in for a kiss. I turned my head slightly, and she only managed to graze my cheek. If she found it odd, she didn't show it. Once she left, I grabbed the manila envelope Dan had prepared for me, the one containing every piece of evidence I had. I drove to the venue, arriving just after the gala had started. The ballroom was packed with people, her colleagues, local business leaders, and a handful of reporters covering the event. I stayed near the back, blending into the crowd, waiting for the right moment. It didn't take long to find her. Lauren stood near the stage, champagne flute in hand, laughing at something Matt had said. He was there too, of course. They weren't standing too close, but the chemistry between them was unmistakable. My stomach turned at the sight. When the speeches began, I knew it was time. I approached the stage quietly, slipping past the event staff. No one stopped me. It was easy enough to blend in with the well-dressed crowd. The MC was in the middle of introducing the firm's CEO when I stepped forward and took the microphone from his hand. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I have something important to share." The room fell silent, hundreds of eyes turning toward me. Lauren's face paled as she realized what was happening. Matt froze, his hand tightening around his glass. "I won't take up too much of your time," I continued, holding up the envelope. "But I think it's important that we celebrate honesty and integrity, not just in business, but in our personal lives as well. Unfortunately, not everyone in this room shares that sentiment." I opened the envelope and pulled out the first photo, holding it up for everyone to see. It was one of the clearer images of Lauren and Matt at the coffee shop, their hands touching across the table. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "This," I said, my voice rising, "is my wife, Lauren, and her co-worker, Matt. They've been carrying on an affair for months, behind my back and, as I recently learned, behind Matt's wife's back as well." The room erupted into chaos. Gasps, whispers, and scattered applause filled the air. Lauren's face was a mask of horror, her mouth opening and closing as though she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Matt tried to step forward, but I raised a hand to stop him. "There's more," I said, pulling out a stack of text message screenshots. "Here's proof of their conversations. Late-night plans, rendezvous, lies they told to cover their tracks." I dropped the papers onto the stage, where they scattered at Lauren's feet. "I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "I trusted both of you, and this is what I get in return?" Lauren finally found her voice. "Michael, please, this isn't the place." "No, Lauren," I said coldly. "This is exactly the place. You didn't care about destroying our marriage in private, so why should I?" The security staff approached, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. I held up my hands and stepped down from the stage, making my way toward the exit. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, their expressions a mix of pity, shock, and awkward sympathy. As I reached the doors, I turned back one last time. Lauren was still standing on the stage, frozen in place, while Matt slipped quietly into the shadows. I felt a grim satisfaction as I walked out into the night. After the chaos of the gala, I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I'd been imagining this confrontation for days, but now that it was over, I wasn't sure how to feel. Was it satisfaction? Relief? Sadness? The truth was, I didn't feel any of those things. Not yet. I felt empty. Like the person I'd been before all of this was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet. I sat in the dark living room for hours, my mind replaying the scene at the gala on an endless loop. The look on Lauren's face, the gasps from the crowd, Matt's pathetic attempt to slink away. It was all burned into my memory. But the more I thought about it, the less triumphant it felt. I hadn't just exposed Lauren. I'd also shattered the illusion of our family. There was no undoing what I'd done. Around midnight, Lauren came home. I heard her heels clicking against the hardwood floor before she even stepped into the living room. When she saw me sitting there, she froze. Her makeup was smudged, her hair slightly disheveled, and her eyes rimmed red from crying. "Michael," she said softly, "can we talk?" I looked at her, my expression unreadable. Talk about what? The affair you've been having? Or the fact that I had to find out through a private investigator? She winced, and for the first time in months, I saw something resembling guilt in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've hurt our family. But what?" I interrupted. "But you couldn't help yourself? But it just happened? Spare me, Lauren. I've heard enough excuses for a lifetime." She sank into the armchair across from me, burying her face in her hands. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said through her sobs. "I never meant for it to go this far. I don't know. I felt lost, unseen, like I wasn't myself anymore." "Lost?" I repeated, my voice hardening. "Do you know what I've been doing for the last 13 years? Working my tail off to give you and the kids everything. I thought we were happy. And if you weren't, why didn't you say something?" "I didn't know how," she admitted. "And then Matt came along, and he made me feel." "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You had choices, Lauren. You could have talked to me. You could have gone to therapy. But instead, you chose to betray me." She didn't argue. She just sat there, tears streaming silently down her face. I stood, pacing the room. "Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just hurt me. You hurt the kids. You hurt us. Everything we built together is gone, Lauren. Gone." "I know," she whispered, "and I hate myself for it." There was a long, painful silence. I finally stopped pacing and faced her. "I can't do this anymore," I said quietly. "I've already contacted a lawyer. The papers will be ready by the end of the week." Her head snapped up. "No, Michael, please. Don't do this. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job. I'll cut all ties with Matt. Just, please don't give up on us." I shook my head, my chest aching with the weight of it all. "It's too late, Lauren. You already gave up on us when you let him into your life. I can't come back from this, and I don't think you can either." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked upstairs, closing the door behind me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of clarity. This was the end of us. There was no going back. The divorce process was brutal. Lauren tried everything to win me back. Letters, promises, even attempts to involve the kids. But I stayed firm. I refused to let her manipulation sway me, no matter how much it hurt. I was doing this for myself, for my dignity, for the future I knew I deserved. When the papers were finalized, Lauren broke down completely. She begged me to reconsider, to give her one more chance, but I was done. I packed my things, moved into a small apartment, and focused on rebuilding my life. The kids took the news hard. I explained everything to them as delicately as I could, but they weren't blind to what had happened. They were angry at Lauren, at Matt, at the situation. Over time, I worked hard to reassure them that they still had two parents who loved them, even if we couldn't be together anymore. As for Lauren and Matt, well, it didn't take long for that house of cards to collapse. Word of their affair spread like wildfire after the gala. Matt's wife filed for divorce within weeks, taking him to the cleaners in the process. Lauren, meanwhile, became the subject of office gossip, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. She eventually left her job, unable to face the whispers and stares. Months passed. I focused on myself, on my kids, on finding joy in the little things again. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I started to feel like myself again. Stronger, wiser, whole. One day, Lauren called me, her voice hesitant and raw. "Michael," she said, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything." I listened quietly, letting her words hang in the air. Then, for the first time, I said the words I hadn't been able to before. "I forgive you." But forgiveness doesn't mean we can go back. It just means I'm ready to move on. And I did. And that's how it all ended. Not with a grand victory or a triumphant moment, but with the quiet realization that sometimes the only way to win is to let go.